All right, so year 11, year 12, just a short video clip to go through the common module, which obviously is human experiences. Remembering that the rubric is key, just as we're going to say pretty much in every single module that we study. This one has a few little ideas that I think are important. The first one being that we're looking at human experiences from both the individual perspective and the collective experience. So the person and then I guess society and the community. All right. So we're sort of trying to maybe at times compare those two, show some similarities and differences between them, and the way that they connect together. Then we've got these three words that we're pretty familiar with, the idea of anomalies, inconsistencies, and paradoxes. And this suits 1984 pretty well because there's like a plethora of them throughout the novel. So that's going to be easy for us to sort of discuss. The idea, though, is that human experiences, have that as an aspect of it. So when you think about like the question from the trial, it was the idea that you sometimes have to go through painful experiences to be able to grow. All right, so that's like I think an aspect generically of human experiences as well. The other element that I think is interesting is the idea of human behavior, human qualities, and human emotions. So we really got to delve into the idea of what makes humanity human. And I think the idea of the human construct and the idea of like who we are as people, I think is pretty important throughout your discussion in this particular module. The thing about you in this fourth dot point is you need to come into this. So it's inviting you to see the world differently and to basically reflect and think. So either challenge or ignite or, to reflect. The stories should do something to you in your impression of human experiences. Okay, so it's pretty important that your personal voice in this particular rubric is strong, particularly if one of those aspects are in the question. Okay, so those four sort of ideas there, if they ask how you see the world differently or how it challenges your assumptions or ignites new ideas or reflects your life or your culture, then it's pretty important that you make comment on that from a personal perspective. And I'll hopefully through the presentation give you a few points where you should be thinking about your opinion and nobody else's, okay? Because I think Orwell leaves you to have opinions. And obviously the last one there, the role of storytelling, and that comes down to the composition and that comes back to Orwell. So, a little bit of context, really simple stuff. He wrote this novel in 1948, obviously just after World War II had finished in 1945. In that time in World War II, we saw this huge rise of totalitarian governments with Hitler and Mussolini in Germany and Italy, respectively. But interestingly, England, which Orwell is English, was in an alliance with Russia, and that was Stalin, and he was a communist dictator. So essentially, even no matter what side you were on, this idea of like totalitarian governments was actually an aspect of both sort of sides of World War II. That concerns him. The other concern is that the community and the people don't stand up and voice their concerns. He feels like we as people are too subservient. So they're his two major concerns about what he's seeing. Number one, in that collective, the collective experience of totalitarianism, and then the individual aspect of human experience is that we seem to be okay with that and we're not doing much about it. Those things are of major concern to him. So I think then when we're looking at 1984, we can look at it on these two different levels that I've spoken to you before. Number one, what Orwell is writing about. Okay, so Orwell uses 1984 to didactically, sort of educate and elucidate ideas that he thinks are of value and of importance. And then obviously the characters within the text have their own human experiences, okay, that are worthy of looking at and worthy of commentating on. So let's have a look first of it as a didactic text, basically saying, look at what it could be like if we had this totalitarian dystopian society. And the exaggeration that he makes is no privacy, no freedom, just an abject misery and total subservience to the state and this alteration of the truth. All right. This idea that, basically the Oceania and Big Brother make up whatever they want. Now, the consequence of this to me is his perception that human experiences that are authentic are basically eliminated because everything is contrived and manufactured. Now, to me, this directly links to humanity's demise, which basically says that if you don't have human experiences that are authentic, you are not human, which gets back to that idea of the human construct. Now, that's one way of looking at it, but I think you could also look at other elements, like this idea of the normalization of paradox. We accept these paradoxical elements of war as peace. We accept that the ministry of love would be the thing that controls us, but is called love. So these paradoxes, they're normalized within Oceania, and people just accept it. So I think there's a commentary there by Orwell that our reluctance, to sort of really understand how we're being manipulated is another major concern to the human construct and then to human experiences. The other one that he's really like strong on is that he really he has a distaste for the proles that he creates, saying why do they not rise up? Why do they not understand their collective, sort of power? And to me, he's directing that at us. Okay, we're the ones who can't grasp that our human experiences are being contrived and they're being sort of manufactured, and we don't do anything to change that. So I think the proles are a real representation of us, and him having a direct go at us. Now that gets back to those sort of four points that I was saying about how it ignites my understanding of the world. Maybe it sort of sparks me to sort of go, well, I need to take back control of those human experiences in my own life. Then when we look at the characters, we've got three major characters I think you could look at. And I think you've got to look at it because you need to cover that individual aspect of the rubric. So Winston, I think, is the most obvious person. At Essentially, obviously, he's the main character, the protagonist, and I think in terms of paradox and anomaly, he's our hero, but he's also our anti-hero. We're so with him about rebelling, and then we're so disappointed when he doesn't. Okay, but I think that's pretty intentional. Intentional. He does a lot of rebelling. Okay, I think I mentioned this too. He purchases the diary, writes in it. He has that slip that proves that he rewrote, a piece of history, and he has it so that he can prove that it was once a different history. Why does he keep that? Because he wants to sort of know the truth, okay? And at that point, he's our hero. The dreams that he has of joining the Brotherhood and connecting with people like O'Brien, who he believes is part of the Brotherhood, is intoxicating for him. And this illegal affair with Julia makes us sort of go, oh, he's got a bit of life in him. He's got a bit of vigor, which at the start of the novel, he didn't potentially have. All right, but he grows. Unfortunately, though, when he's taken to room 101, we see him, sort of quickly revert away from the idea of being a hero. And you know what? At the start he had that gross ulcer, and he defied that and sort of defied the party as well, despite the fact that we sort of thought he was lost and almost lifeless. He rose up against it, but then he loses it really quickly. And this, sort of the power of the party with Room 101, and when he says, I don't care what you do to her, tear her face or strip her to the bones, not me, Julia, not me, when he's about to have the rat attached to his face, sort of shows how quickly he becomes the anti-hero. And we're like, man, he doesn't show a heap of backbone. But there's a commentary, that Orwell uses there to sort of go, you know what, that's reality. That's what people do. They give up too quickly. They don't really care for humanity and what's authentic human experience. They're pretty much willing to give that away for their own sort of safety, particularly when they're scared or when they're feeling fear. The final line of the novel is one of those points where you get to make your own sort of assessment. So obviously, it's one of the more famous closing lines of any novel. He loved Big Brother. It totally contradicts pretty much most of what Winston is doing throughout the novel in trying to rebel. And it's confusing and it confounds us, and we're not sure who Winston is. We don't really know, but it ignites a reaction of some sort. All right, and whatever that reaction is, I'm going to give you mine, but yours could be totally different. Mine is that Orwell sort of makes Winston real. All right, he makes him a real character, and the real character here is essentially a person who, despite being presented with the party, actually can't overcome it, because that's who we are. That's reality. Winston wants to rebel. He does. He wants to sort of do things differently. But then when stuff gets real, he shrinks. Okay, and I think we mostly probably would too. To me, it's honest. It's truthful. Okay, even though it's a dystopian novel, I think we probably would mainly probably sort of react in the same manner. Julia, quite a different character, but similar in the way that she rebels against the party. We've got that sort of, again, paradox that she's part of the Junior Anti-Sex League, but blatantly rejects this. She sleeps with many members of the party and is quite honest about that. And I think in their first sexual encounter, she tells Winston, "I'm corrupt to the bones," and he loves that. Like he loves that she's rebellious and against the party. And her other rebellion is about like getting these rationed items that no one can get. But she doesn't really seem that bothered with the Brotherhood. She's more engaged with living and experiencing aspects that please her and satisfy her. Um, she to me is a bit more instinctual and a bit more base, compared to Winston. But again, we don't really see Julia after they're captured. We have references to her, but she doesn't come back into the novel during the sort of last part. But Winston obviously refers to her because she's pretty crucial to his story. And this is the one that I think is interesting again from your point of view. O'Brien tells Winston, "She betrayed you, Winston, immediately, unreservedly. I have seldom seen anyone come over to us so promptly." Again, this is up to you now. Do you believe that Julia would do that, or do you think O'Brien's lying about that? Now, again, that's your reaction to the text and your understanding, and those things I think again bring in your personal voice when you consider those. The last character that I wanted to talk about was O'Brien, and again, he's paradoxical. He represents both hope and despair. Initially, he's the symbol of rebellion in Winston's eye. He looks at him and goes, "Yes, this is my answer." But then once we get to the end of the novel, O'Brien is the one who basically tortures him. So it's really confusing. And I think these quotes are really confusing. We've got one quote: "When he spoke, his voice was gentle and patient. He had the air of a doctor, a teacher, even a priest, anxious to explain and persuade rather than to punish," which shows O'Brien not torturing him. He's actually like trying to get him to be a better human by coming over to Big Brother and accepting like the party's sort of mandate. But then when he's got him in room 101, this is the line that he says before he's about to attach the contraption to his face. "Have you ever seen a rat leap through the air? They will leap onto your face and bore straight into it." That's a very paradoxical character. He's supportive, yet he is his tormentor. And I think that's another quote, that his tormentor, his friend. It's confusing even to Winston what O'Brien represents. Another point for you to assess and analyze if you're going to speak about O'Brien and come up with an answer. And again, that's going to add personal voice to your response when you are able to articulate what you think O'Brien actually does represent. Again, from my point of view, I think O'Brien understands the power of the party from the inside and knows that they can't be defeated. All right, and he's resigned to that fact, and he wants essentially Winston to accept that, because to me it essentially makes his life easier. Okay, if he can go back to his bosses and go, "Yeah, Winston, sort of confessed, and he loves Big Brother." So I don't really think there's much to O'Brien personally, but I think again you could look at, he's a very complex character. Okay, and I think you can look at what's sort of motivating him around human experience compared to some of the other characters. Obviously, you've got to write about techniques, and there's not a heap of techniques in Orwell's text. Like it's a novel and it's pretty sort of there's a couple of things, but there's not a heap of things like compared to, let's say, something like Richard III and Looking for Richard. So we've got to be a bit picky. Obviously, we already have to write about paradox and stuff, so that's obviously in there. There's heaps of those. But we want to sort of get that idea of the suite of techniques combining to create an incongruous nature in the writing. And there's a series of those sort of techniques that do that. And why does he want it to be incongruous? Because it fits in with the human experience, all right? That it's not clear cut, it's not easy to understand, okay? And why don't the proles rise up? Again, it's not easy to understand. Why don't O'Brien sort of join the Brotherhood and sort of come and help Winston? Again, very difficult to understand. So he wants to then write a novel that has that sort of paradoxical, incongruous nature throughout. He's got a lot of motifs in the story though. So like even the Victory like cigarettes and the Victory coffee, like the irony there that he uses throughout that these products are sort of called Victory, sort of shows the monopolization of society. Okay, and again, not just from a product point of view, but a monopolization of ideas. I think the paperweight is interesting because it sort of represents hope, and it's sort of like got that symbolic sort of sense that it's like the past. But when it smashes to smithereens, essentially when they're caught, it sort of shows again the breaking of that hope. And I guess even the final sentence, "He loved Big Brother," again is almost that shattering of the paperweight. Okay, so you could use that collectively. I think even Goldstein, like the idea of the enemy, the opposition, okay, is another motif that you could refer to, and the way that he utilizes that to talk about our need as humans to dislike or to feel collective in our hate for someone else is actually a way of connecting us. Again, another paradox. The slogans are an effective technique that we sort of went through before. The idea that freedom is ignorance, war is peace. These sort of things are pretty effective to write about, and the slogans are the way that they manipulate the people. I thought it was interesting that the novel starts clearly in third person. It was a cold April day sort of thing, but eventually it gets to a more second person narrative where he went to the door. I think that those changes sort of show first the collective like experience of the party and its influence on everyone, and then the second person narrative becomes more connected with the ideas of what's going on for the individuals within that collective experience. Okay, so that's a really quick sort of summary. Overall, again, a little bit like any other sort of module, you need to make a decision about what your sort of ideas are going to be. And the big thing is then to make a logical sequence of those things. So you might go, let's say, this sort of structure where you go, look, I'm going to look at the individual experience. I'm going to look at the collective experience, and then I'm going to look at, sort of Orwell's didactic sort of, the way that he uses the novel as a didactic tool. Or you might start with the collective, the party, then what that does to the individual, and then what Orwell's trying to say. Whatever it is, they're the three sort of ideas that strike me as being things that are easy to write about and things that are linked into human experience. But I think that's the important thing. Whatever you choose to do, you've got to link it into human experience in a really strong manner, connect it to those other parts of the rubric so that you can engage with the question. The few questions that I asked you throughout, I think, are important too to gain that personal voice and that other aspect of the rubric about like igniting sort of ideas or growing your understanding, okay, of your sort of life and community. All right, thanks, guys.